The HOA showdown. A quiet farm morning turns into chaos. It all started on a peaceful Saturday morning. I was hammering nails into what was supposed to be a simple wooden cabin, a modest addition to my farm, just a small rest stop for the horse tours I ran. The weather was perfect, the birds were chirping, and I hummed while I worked, completely unaware that the tranquility would soon shatter. Before I could even finish my thoughts, I heard the distant sound of sirens slicing through the calm. 3 police cruisers raced down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust behind them. I stood up, completely confused. What emergency could possibly require this kind of response in the middle of nowhere? Then I saw her, Malora Jensen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. She stepped out of the patrol cars, her finger pointing straight at me like I was the villain in a movie. "He's illegally building on our waterfront land," she announced, her voice loud enough to echo across the farm. The officers stood still, clearly puzzled, glancing at the small cabin, as if expecting to find a major crime scene. "Sir, what are you building here?" one officer asked, genuinely curious about why they had been called. I wiped my hands on my jeans and pulled out the paperwork. "Just a small cabin on my property. It's for my horse tour business," I explained, showing them the official documents. But Malora wasn't having it. She immediately launched into a tirade about how my cabin violated HOA rules and would destroy property values. She sounded as though I was planning to build a toxic waste dump, not a small, functional structure. The officer reviewed my papers, his confusion growing. "This looks legitimate, sir. You have the right documents. You own this land," he said. But Malora wasn't backing down. "I don't care about his papers. I'm the HOA president. This affects everyone," she screamed, her face turning crimson with anger. As the officers returned to their cars, I stood there, bewildered, trying to process what had just happened. I'd always lived in apartments, so I had no idea what an HOA even was, let alone why this woman thought she had any control over what I did on my own land. But before I could make sense of it, a neighbor, Betty Carter, approached. She was in her late 40s, with the no-nonsense attitude of someone who dealt with difficult people her whole life. "You need to check exactly what you bought," she whispered, glancing toward Malora's house. "That creek running through the properties? Malora doesn't actually own what she thinks she does." Betty's words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. Something bigger was brewing. The next morning, I was back at work, trying to enjoy the quiet as I measured and cut wood for the walls. I should have known better than to think the peace would last. Exactly at 10 a.m., like clockwork, Malora appeared at the edge of my property with a clipboard and measuring tape, ready for war. "I'm documenting violations for the HOA," she announced loudly, her tone dramatic and accusatory. I stopped and watched her with mild curiosity. "What violations?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Unauthorized waterfront construction," she said, checking off imaginary boxes. "Environmental disruption, failure to get HOA approval." The whole scene felt like something out of a bad movie, and I almost laughed, but I knew sarcasm wouldn't help. Instead, I went back to work, hoping she'd go away. But no such luck. That afternoon, I watched as Malora made her rounds through the neighborhood, knocking on doors and handing out flyers. The flyers screamed in bold letters, "Emergency. Cabin construction threatens our creek." I couldn't believe it. My small cabin had been turned into an environmental disaster in her narrative. According to Malora, my project was an urgent crisis that required immediate action to protect the creek. By the next morning, the effects of her campaign were clear. Neighbors who had once been friendly were now avoiding me. "Why didn't you ask for permission first?" one neighbor demanded. "Your cabin blocks our view of the creek," complained another, even though the structure was tiny. The social isolation was immediate. Avoided eye contact, blocked parking spaces, whispered conversations when they thought I wasn't listening. It was as if the entire neighborhood had decided I was guilty of something, but no one would tell me what it was. The only person who still treated me normally was Betty, but even she had to be careful. Openly supporting me came with consequences. Malora's husband, Chuck, who had been lurking in the background, now stepped forward, using his role as a bank employee to support his wife's crusade. "Property values are at stake," he said, adding financial weight to her environmental arguments. Despite all of this, I refused to escalate things. I stayed calm, continued working, and stated the facts. I owned the land, I had the papers, and I was building a small, legal structure for my business. Malora was clearly frustrated by my calm demeanor. She wanted me to be the bad guy, an outsider disrupting their community. But I wasn't. I was just a guy with a hammer, trying to build something useful on land that belonged to me. It all started on a peaceful Saturday morning. The more she fumed, I was hammering nails into what was supposed to be a simple wooden cabin. A modest addition to much bigger. Just a small rest stop for the horse tours I ran. The showdown that the weather was perfect. Neighborhood rules. The birds were chirping. Malora had spent the week building up to a threat, completely unaware that the tranquility would soon shatter. Before I could even finish my county enforcement, I heard the distance violation sirens. She announced with unwavering confidence. 3 police cruisers raced down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust behind them, making it clear she thought she could shut me down using official channels. What emergency could possibly require this kind of response in the middle of nowhere? Overwhelmed by the thought that I was up against an opponent who seemed determined to make my life miserable. But when I checked my patrol cars, I found a finger pointing straight at me like I was the villain in a movie. Inside was a illegally building on our waterfront photograph from the 1960s, showing the creek that ran through the properties. The officers stood still, check what Hartwell clearly puzzled you. Glancing at the small cabin, are in the metal box as if expecting to find a major crime. She doesn't know about the box. Sir, intrigued but skeptical, one officer asked, followed the notes genuinely curious about why early Saturday morning. I wiped my hands on my jeans old farm and pulled out the paperwork. About 2 miles from just a small cabin on my property. Behind the barn, it's for my horse tour business. I found a rusted metal box locked tight, showing them with a few taps from my hammer. I broke the lock, wasn't having inside were official She immediately papers. Launched into a tirade about jargon, how my cabin violated HOA rules. I own the entire property bed and water rights. She sounded as though I was planning to build a toxic waste survey map, not a small, it hit me like a functional structure. The officer had been claiming authority over a creek that belonged entirely to me. This looks legitimate, sir. Every time she mentioned the right community waterfront, you own this land, shared resources. But Malora wasn't about my private property. I don't care about his papers. Threats about environmental protection were meaningless. This effect she had no jurisdiction. She screamed. I quickly photographed the documents with my phone as the officers returned to their cars. Mind racing with the revelation. I couldn't believe how deep this ruse had gone. I'd always lived in apartments, I decided to keep this discovery to myself. So I had no idea what an HOA was. I was curious to see just how far Malora would push her fake control before reality caught up with her. The following day, I visited the county office. A neighbor, Betty Carter, confirmed everything I discovered. She was in her late 40s. Yes, this matches our records attitude of someone who dealt with difficult people her whole life. You need to check exactly what you valuable. She whispered. Malora ramped up her campaign. This time with Chuck by her side. Threatening lawsuits doesn't actually own what she thinks she does. By the afternoon, Betty's words sent a chill down my 12 signatures on a petition. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. I stopped construction. Something bigger was brewing. She also announced an emergency HOA trying to enjoy the quiet as I measured and cut wood to stop illegal construction. I should have known better. Her signs were professionally printed, exactly at 10 a.m. air of official authority. Malora appeared at the edge of my property with a clipboard and measuring tape. She whispered, "Ready for war." She's ordered a professional documenting violations for the HOA. Something about no building zones. Her tone dramatic. I think it's going to get much worse before it gets better. I stopped and watched her with mild curiosity. A large wooden sign appeared on my property. I asked, planted firmly by the creek with unauthorized waterfront construction. No, she said, checking off imaginary boxes. Violators, environmental disruption. It looked official to get HOA approval. The sign was positioned like something out of a bad visible movie. From the main and I almost laughed. Malora had clearly gone sarcasm wouldn't help. I continued working during the day. I went back to work, documenting hoping she'd everything Malora did. But no such luck. Betty, that afternoon, became my secret ally. I watched as Malora made her rounds through the neighborhood about Malora's knocking on doors and handing out flyers. The mailman revealed that she had flyers official-looking documents from a print shop. Emergency. She's planning something construction big, threatens our creek. It's going to look very official when she does My small cabin Friday had been turned into an environmental disaster in her narrative. And I saw her and Chuck examining it with my project was an urgent crisis that required immediate action to protect the creek. Malora arrived by the next morning, community the effects of her campaign ready to deliver her victory. Neighbors who had once been friendly were now avoiding me. The crowd, why didn't you ask for permission first? Listen, one neighbor eagerly as she declared, "Your cabin blocks our view waterfront belongs complained to all of us." Even though the structure rang out with the confidence, the social isolation was immediate. Believed in her avoided eye contact, but I had other parking spaces. I had been whispered conversations when they thought I wasn't knowing that once Malora's confidence entire neighborhood had decided I was guilty of something. Armed with my documents and recordings, I walked the only person who still treated me normally was Betty. Immediately shifted she had as I set up my laptop openly supporting me came with consequences. Ready to reveal the Malora's husband. I need to show everyone been lurking in the background. I announced. Now step my voice forward, cutting through the using tension. His role as a Malora bank tried to regain control. Crusade. But I was already property values are at stake. Her own voice declaring financial weight to her environmental arguments. While the document, despite all of it was mine, I refused to
survey
escalate
maps,
things.
the legal papers,
I stayed calm,
and the recordings
continued
all
working,
shattered
and
her
stated
false
the facts.
narratives.
The
I
crowd's
owned the land.
reaction was
I had the
immediate.
papers,
Gasps
and I was
of
building
disbelief
a small
and
legal
murmurs
structure
filled
for
the
my
air.
business.
Betty stepped
Malora
forward
was
and
clearly
asked,
frustrated
"What
by my
meeting?"
calm demeanor.
As the fake
She
HOA
wanted me to
meeting
be
was
the bad
called into
guy,
question.
an outsider
Malora
disrupting
tried to
their
dismiss
community.
it,
But the
evidence
evidence
was too strong.
The facade she'd built over weeks came crashing down in front of everyone. Neighbors began speaking out, saying they never received notices about the meeting. They realized they'd been misled by someone they had trusted. "You lied to us," one neighbor said. "We turned against an innocent man because of your lies." As the truth spread, Chuck quietly distanced himself, clearly unwilling to continue supporting Malora. The community quickly demanded Malora's removal as HOA president, and within moments, the fake sign was torn down. The transformation was swift. Neighbors who had once been against me now apologized. "We're sorry we believed her," one said. "You had every right to build on your own property." Malora's downfall was complete, and the entire community began rebuilding, with Betty stepping in as the interim leader. Construction on my cabin resumed, this time with genuine community support. The same neighbors who had once pressured me to quit were now eager to help, bringing tools, food, and goodwill. Within weeks, the cabin was completed, a symbol of cooperation and honesty. My horse tour business flourished, and the peaceful community atmosphere was restored. Malora's departure sent a clear message: honesty and cooperation always win over manipulation and deceit. As the community began working together, property values stabilized, and new families moved in, attracted by the newfound sense of trust and unity. 6 months later, the community had completely transformed. The conflicts that once plagued it were gone, replaced by genuine collaboration. My cabin was a success, and my business grew, all thanks to the community's ability to come together in the face of deception. Looking back, I learned that sometimes the best way to handle a bully is not with confrontation, but with the truth, carefully presented at the right time. Malora's lies were exposed not through anger or force, but through patience, documentation, and strategic thinking. And when the truth finally spoke, it was louder than any of her false authority. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated with more exciting content. Bell, got thoughts or feedback? Drop a comment below, and we'd love to hear from you. Let's keep this conversation going. Raising hands.